Hello, ChiefsRaysBolts here once again, joined with A's Raider. Hold on. Giants Niners Dub Shark. I swear to God, it's not intentional. It's just so it's Giants Niners Dub Shark.
You're
So
good, man.
we're talking about NHL playoffs. We haven't made a video yet this year on them, but I feel like now's a good time because it's the final two. It's the final two. We could talk about briefly how our team season went, and then move on to the Stanley Cup final preview.
I think the funny part about all this is the two teams that are in the Stanley Cup, like, although we don't have any really association to them, I mean, you're from Florida, but the two teams that are in it are both in the same division, like they're rivals with our teams. Um, so, we played Edmonton many times. I also, on a more like professional level, I covered the LA Kings versus Oilers series in round one. So I sort of had a connection to them in that way. On my media side, but of course your team, the Lightning, unfortunately did lose to the Panthers, so
Yeah,
you
these
kind of have that
guys.
connection. Yeah, so yeah, I mean our teams, both fell short different ways. You guys obviously had that first round loss. I thought maybe you guys could upset. I know my bracket didn't say it, but definitely an interesting round one, the Battle of Florida once again, and you guys won it the last time and went on to the Stanley Cup the last time. But of course, Florida is such a good team. They beat the President's Trophy winner now 2 years in a row. That's crazy. In last year with Boston and this year with New York. But yeah, I mean, my team on a personal note was the worst team in the NHL, and we were rewarded for that. We got the number one pick in the draft, and that's gonna be Macklin Celebrini. So we're bringing along a really good prospect. We also signed our number one prospect, Will Smith, to his entry level contract, and he was the fourth overall pick last year. So future's looking good, but we fell short, of course, once again. So yeah.
The Lightning are stuck in this weird. They're stuck in this weird position where they're not getting worse, but they're not getting better. It's exactly what happened with the Pittsburgh Penguins after they went back to back. They try to keep their core around. They think that they could pull off another win, keeping the core intact, even though they got to let go of some key pieces. It's an exact repeat of the Penguins, and now they're just in this position where you're a playoff team, but once you're in the playoffs, you don't really do anything. Once you're there, I knew going into it that we were not the better team. Florida was likely going to win it. I thought it would be a harder fought series than 5 games. I thought it'd be 6, maybe 7. But to go out in 5, barely avoided the sweep. 2 went down 3-0 in the series, but I can't say I'm surprised. This was a team that felt lackluster all year, couldn't really pull things together. I know towards the end of the regular season they looked like they were getting on a streak. They looked like they were getting hot. They were poised for a deep playoff run. But the truth is that they're not as talented as the Panthers. I think after seeing the Panthers play the Rangers, in which I believe the Rangers were very outplayed to the Panthers, I think the Lightning could have had a much better attempt at a playoff run if they had started off with a series against the Rangers or maybe the Bruins. I think either way we're the underdogs in any of those series. We weren't really a team that was built for the playoffs this year. Florida's just a fucking powerhouse. No other way to say it. They're the reigning Eastern Conference champs. They've gone back to back to the Stanley Cup. Shout out to the state of Florida, man. This entire decade, Eastern Conference champions have only been Tampa and Florida. Tampa and Fort Lauderdale. That's it. And really just it's a great look for Florida because this is a sport that's traditionally northern Canadian, in northern states. Like Florida, you don't think of hockey when you think of Florida, but Florida has absolutely dominated the Eastern Conference for the last 5 seasons now. And while Florida are rival to the Tampa Bay Lightning, I can't help but salute to them for keeping the state of Florida streak alive. The Florida dominance alive in the NHL. It's really cool to see. So that being said, yeah, Lightning went out early. I can't say I'm surprised. This is just a team that they need to have some rebuilding discussions. They really do.
100%. I agree with everything you said. The thing that impresses me with the Panthers is the fact that they went through not only just a very hard division in the regular season with, Boston on their necks, and you're just having to play through, a full season of that division, but also in the playoffs, having to go through two of the best goaltenders in the league in Jeremy Swayman. That's the best goaltending tandem in the league in Boston. You have Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman, and then in New York you have the President's Trophy winner with Igor Shesterkin. So I just think, for them, they've seen so much. And look, Stuart Skinner, and we'll talk about Edmonton too, but Stuart Skinner in the playoffs has been magnificent. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he's been great. But I think when you're stacking him against the other goaltenders that the Panthers have already seen, I don't think he's any better than those two. So, and then, they beat LA 4-1. Another thing too, with the Panthers is none of their series have gone to Game 7. Game 6 was the farthest they've gone. Vancouver very well could have beat Edmonton with a third-string goaltender in Artur Shilovs. So that, I don't know if that's concerning because he was playing very good for a young goaltender in Vancouver. But, Edmonton very well could have lost to Vancouver. And maybe some say they should have. They didn't play great in that Game 7. Vancouver almost came back. And so I think in this series, it's a battle of a very top-heavy team in Edmonton with McDavid playing crazy right now. He has 31 points in the playoffs. He's at a near 2-point-per-game pace right now. Evan Bouchard, who's, I think on the blue line for sure, I think Edmonton's better with Bouchard. And then, of course, Leon Draisaitl and just the team that they've assembled for years now and have never been able to get over this hump, and now they finally have. But I just think Florida's a lot more deep. I think they're the much deeper team in this series. They don't have a guy with 30 points on their roster, but they have 3 to 4 point per game players in the playoffs, and Tkachuk and Barkov and Verhaeghe. All those guys are very good. And look, Sam Reinhart was their leading goal scorer in the regular season. He hasn't been great in the playoffs thus far. He's scoring goals, but he's not getting points per game. And even with him at not the same production as he used to be, they're still dominating the playoffs. So I totally agree with you. I think Florida is the team to look out for. But I think, devil's advocate, Connor McDavid is an electric player, and he is going to probably win Edmonton at least one game in this series single-handedly. And so I don't think we can completely count out the Oilers, but I do want to say that they've looked a little bit more shaky in their path. And let's not forget that they were still, not a division winner, right? I guess, Florida wasn't either, but for them, it's just been, Edmonton has had a lot of bumps in the road, and I think getting that new coach in Chris Knobloch was huge in their resurgence. But they have been a team that has struggled at times, and they put a lot on the shoulders of McDavid. If McDavid doesn't rise to the occasion in any given game, they're not going to win. But I think he will. But I think the Panthers have this series.
Yeah, when you look at the leading goal scorers from the regular season this year, there are 2 Edmonton Oilers in the top 14, and neither of those 2 are named Connor McDavid. And so right. It's really crazy just how much of a powerhouse the front couple lines for the Oilers are. You have Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, Nugent Hopkins. You just have this crazy lineup, and when you see Edmonton play, they are so fast. That is the one thing I've noticed with Edmonton these playoffs is they are so much faster than every other team they play. They literally are so fast that they make the other team look like they are skating in slow motion, and that is the upside to the Oilers. When you look at this roster, the offensive powerhouses they have, you question how do they not make it here every year, really? And so I think the answer to that would just be, depth, maybe? Goaltending, maybe? I don't really know. It's hard to say. But regardless, I am really happy for both of these teams. I am. First of all, Oilers, who doesn't want to see Connor McDavid in a Stanley Cup final? First time this has ever happened. This is a league-wide favorite player, fan favorite guy. It's just, how can you not love this guy and love watching him play? Oilers came to Tampa. They come to Tampa every year, once a year. But a couple of years ago, I specifically chose to go to an Oilers game in Tampa just because I wanted to watch Connor McDavid play. Motherfucker scored 2 goals on us, and we still won. But still, it's like, guys, still he's such a hard player to stop. And the fact that he was 3rd on his team in goal scoring this season just says it just speaks volumes to how dangerous this Oilers team is. That being said, Florida Panthers, I'm just so glad it wasn't New York or Boston. That's the only thing I care about every year. As long as it's not New York or Boston, I don't care. It's weird because the NHL for the last few seasons, ever since the Panthers got really good, they've been trying to force this Battle of Florida kind of rivalry onto the Florida fans, the Tampa fans. And while, yeah, there's some trash talk. There's some trash talk between the two teams. They're the Panthers organization, the Panthers fans, they are nowhere near as unlikable as New York or Boston. And so, majority of Lightning fans want the Oilers to win because they don't want the rival team, the rival in-state team to win. Me personally, I want them to win. I do. Because A, Florida represent. B, they've never won a cup. Who doesn't like seeing a first-time cup winner? And they just, in my opinion, they have a likable roster of guys. They don't really have anybody that people don't like. You know what I mean? Kachuk's a really fun player to watch. Reinhart, Bennett, Bobrovsky's had a pretty damn good run himself. It's they're a deep team. They're fun to watch, and like you said, they have not gone to a Game 7, which shows just how great they've been in the playoffs so far. And for them, the Florida Panthers, for them to come off a Stanley Cup loss last season and battle their way back, fight as hard as they have fought to this point to get back to the Stanley Cup final, that's a team of determination. It's a team with a drive and a will to win. It's a team of destiny, dare I say. And I don't think Florida's going to go fight this hard to get back to this point and lose a second straight year. I don't see it happening. And to further emphasize that, I don't think when you score... Well, hold on. I'm talking about the Oilers here. When you only have 10 shots on net to win the game against the Stars, you won with 10 shots on net. That's the fewest shots on net in a conference final series clinching win in NHL history. I know it's an ESPN-ass stat. It's very, very complex there. But yes, that's a fact. They had the fewest amount of shots on net for a team that clinched an Eastern or a Western Conference championship. So it's kind of crazy. I think you should be worried if you are an Oilers fan because you need more than 10 shots on net. You are lucky to win one game in the playoffs with 10 shots on net. We'll see how you do in the Stanley Cup final. That's just my take. You have this powerhouse Florida team who's fought so hard to get back to this point for a second straight year, and only teams with sheer determination can get back to this point. And then you have an Oilers team. While I'm a big McDavid fan, love watching him play, super stoked to see him at his first Stanley Cup final. I don't think Oilers have what it takes to take down the Florida Panthers. I just don't. I think the Panthers win it, and I think the Panthers win it in 5 or 6. I don't even think it goes 7.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, I think I said something incorrect earlier. The Panthers did not win their division. Or no, the Panthers did win their division. I correct myself. But here's one thing that the Oilers have going for them, and again, I don't know if this comes to fruition in the Stanley Cup final, but if the Oilers want to win this series, this is what's going to have to happen. The Oilers' special teams in the playoffs has been electric. I mean, it has been they're scoring tons of goals on the power play, and as they should be. I mean, they're a top-heavy team, and you're using just a couple guys on the 2 minutes, of course. So they're very good scoring on the power play, but also their penalty kill is very good as well. Against Vancouver, I know Vancouver in that Game 7, I think, had a 4-minute minor and couldn't score. And then, against Dallas, similar story, right? Now, the thing with the Panthers is the Panthers get a lot of penalties. The Panthers are a physical team. They're not a very well-disciplined team. And obviously it hasn't hurt them yet. But you combine a very good Edmonton special teams with a very, ill-disciplined Panthers team. That might be something that Edmonton wants to feast on, especially, this is, you take away off the ice stuff, but like we talk about, Canadian teams not winning the Stanley Cup in over 30 years, right? I mean, it's going to be raucous up there in Canada, right? The last time a Canadian team went to the Stanley Cup, there were no fans at the game. It was the Montreal Canadiens. And so, it's going to be a very interesting thing. Obviously, Edmonton went to the Stanley Cup in 06. I believe they lost to I think it was the Penguins in 06. I could be wrong. I think it was the Penguins. I actually don't know. I honestly, I know they lost in 06 though. I think it was the Penguins might have been 09. Mix those up. But I know Oilers went in 06, and of course, like you said, the Panthers have only lost the Stanley Cup final. They lost last year, and they lost to the Avalanche way back in the earlier days of the Avalanche. So it's going to be one of those things where it's two teams that want it. Now, I think one interesting thing is I'm rooting for the Panthers, but for a different reason, and that's because, and this might sound silly to some people, but I think Wayne Gretzky, what he was able to do for the Oilers organization, take them from a team that was just a normal team to a powerhouse dynasty. I think and this is kind of a dumb argument. Like obviously someday the Oilers are going to win it, the Stanley Cup, whether it be now or in the future, but I think it sort of cheapens Gretzky's legacy a little bit if that drought is broken against such a good team like the Panthers. Now, of course, McDavid is an electric player, and they're such a good team, but I'm a big Gretzky fan. I think he's just one of my favorite players ever, even though he never played for my team, and I kind of like him being synonymous with Oilers' greatness. He never was really that successful on any other team, so I really like that legacy, and I feel like of course they'll win it. So, the Oilers will win again sometime, but I like having Gretzky kind of be the face of their accomplishments. And, I think McDavid is in line to be a guy like that, but he's also been in the NHL now for a decade, and it's the first time he's here. Now, of course, that's not necessarily his fault. Hockey's like baseball. You need 9, to 12 really good players, right? It's maybe not the same way in baseball where it's like you can have Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout on the same team and be terrible. But in hockey, if your top lines are good and you don't have any depth, you're not going to be a great team. And we've seen that with the Oilers in their non-great years. But I think now this is the best we've ever seen of the Oilers in the McDavid era, right? You talk about Zach Hyman, a guy who is, people talk about him all the time as always a merchant just in the crease, but he's very good at, deceiving goaltenders, setting screens, and I think that's something to respect. But I do think at the end of the day, the Panthers are a team that, like you mentioned, they're physical, they're tough, and that leads to penalties. But they show other teams that, we're not going to take anything from you. And that's why they rack up penalties. But they're also a very good forechecking team and a very, very good physical, just, dominant team that isn't afraid to show the other team what's up. And I think they're going to do that in this series.
It was the Hurricanes that beat the Oilers.
Oh, okay. That's right.
Stanley Cup. To argue your point about Gretzky, and okay, here's Connor McDavid. He's in line to be a great, but he's been in the league for almost a decade, and this is his first time in a cup. My argument is it's a completely different league now than it was back in Gretzky's day. First of all, and second of all, you just, if you took Wayne Gretzky in his prime and put him against Connor McDavid in his prime, I think Connor McDavid clears Gretzky. It's just a different game. It's kind of like the Babe Ruth talk. Everybody loves regarding Babe Ruth as the GOAT because of stats, but let's be for real. If he plays in modern day baseball, Babe Ruth, he's not even getting drafted out of college. And that's just the way it is. And I know 1900s, or when did he play? 1900s, 1910s, something like that. That's a much bigger gap than the 1980s and 1990s to now. But point is, there are fewer teams in the league. I don't believe a salary cap was integrated yet, so Wayne Gretzky kind of had a lot more wiggle room there. And while I'm not diminishing any of his accomplishments, he still is by far and away the greatest to ever do it. I think when all is said and done, championships aside, because it's a different league. It's structured to where you're not going to win every year. It's structured to where there's more parity, and it's structured to where it's so difficult to even reach a cup that I think, the cups aside, I think when all is said and done, McDavid's the GOAT, period. Been a huge McDavid fan for years. Super happy that he's finally here. It was only a matter of time. He was so due for it. And I hate to say that I don't think he's going to win. But I think that he's bound to at some point in his career. I think the Oilers are very close. They're very close to being complete enough to win a Stanley Cup. I don't think it's their year. I think Florida is just, it's their year, period. You know how you can just feel it with some teams? It's their time, it's their destiny. I strongly feel that way against about the Panthers this year. So love the Oilers, love McDavid. I hope they do great. I think Florida's winning.
Talk about the Oilers, it's confusing too because they have such good talent. It's like what's missing at this point? Like why didn't they win the Pacific? Why did they struggle a little bit against Vancouver in a third string goaltender? And I think the answer just comes back down to it's goaltending. I think Stuart Skinner is great, but you're having to play him every single night, and Calvin Pickard is the backup. Whereas for Florida, Bobrovsky is a very experienced goaltender who's going to give you great work every night. But I honestly think that if Florida put in Anthony Stolarz to relieve him, I think they're still winning games. I mean, it's a great goaltending tandem. It's not quite Swayman and Ullmark, but it's very good. But I think, we talk about the Oilers just, and they could very well prove us wrong in this series. And again, I'm happy for McDavid too. And I hope that wasn't missed, I don't want him to win it, but I think he's well deserving and everything. I just think for Edmonton, he has a very good supporting cast, and he's obviously the best player on that team, but they're still missing something. Like, they were a very good team in the regular season, but that was after they got their new head coach. Like, they were a god-awful team to start the year. And then they went on a huge stretch of great games. I mean, right around, I think it was the Winter Classic or whatever outdoor game they played in against the Flames. They were playing horribly back then. And yes, Connor McDavid was injured. They're also dealing with just a coaching problem. And I think Chris Knobloch is a very good coach, and I think he's going to win a Stanley Cup with the Oilers at some point. But I agree. I think they're still just missing one thing. But the thing that Florida has is they have, like you said, it's not just like the feeling of, they were there last year. They've had a lot of contending years. They won the President's Trophy a few years ago. They have just like this physical toughness, and maybe the Oilers thing is speed. I think the thing for the Panthers, it's physicality, right? We talked about Tkachuk. We talk about their whole team on the forwards and on the blue line. Their team is so good at checking. I don't know the last time I've seen a team that's this physical and this able to win pucks in the forecheck and on the back check. I just think for Florida, like you said, they know what it takes to be here. I mean, McDavid has had plenty of good playoff success in his career. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of get that misinterpreted. Like, yes, he's never been to a Stanley Cup or, of course, won one, but he's had some good playoff performances, and usually it's his team that blunders him, and now he's finally reached over that hump. But I think for Florida, I mean, they've shown so much resiliency. I mean, beating the President's Trophy winner, I said it earlier, 2 times in a row is remarkable. And beating Boston 2 years in a row. Boston, they weren't quite as good as they were this year, but they were a damn good team this year. The Boston Bruins had the best goaltending tandem in the league. They had David Pastrnak, who's one of the best forwards in the league. He's a Hart Trophy contender for a reason. And, I think for Florida, they know what it takes to beat great teams. I don't think Edmonton is, and really, you can dispute this if you disagree, but I don't think Edmonton's better than New York or Boston, really. I think both of those teams are harder to beat. And look, Florida did it in 6 games to both of them. So I just think it's one of those things where, on paper, doesn't necessarily matter, but I think looking at it in a prediction standpoint, it does. So we'll see.
I agree with you. I mean, I think the New York... I really believed that the winner of the New York-Florida series was going to win the Stanley Cup. I will say I felt personally that Florida outplayed New York in almost every single game, even the few that they lost. Or I guess because it was a 6-game series. So the overtime loss that the Panthers had, they were just clearly the better team in that game. New York had one lucky turn of events and won the game in overtime, but I felt truly that the Panthers outplayed New York in almost every aspect in almost every game that series. And even though I feel that way, I still think New York probably wins against the Oilers if if that happens. That being said, I think it would have been a closer series, like 7 games maybe 6, no fewer than 6. I love Edmonton, I really do. I think I had them in my bracket winning the cup last season. Every year I expect a lot from them because they're a stacked team offensively, and there's no reason that McDavid can't make a cup. And they usually just tend to fizzle out in the first or second round. I think they've had a Western Conference appearance a year or two ago. Can't recall. But I think it's great for them to have the experience now because I think they are setting themselves up for success in the future. Because this is just the first time that McDavid has made the cup. I don't think it'll be his last. And I also don't think he's going to be playing for any other team anytime soon. So I think they're poised to make a return to the cup within the next few years, win or lose this series.
I think too, when we look at the Western Conference, just following it all season, right? Like, I honestly think if Edmonton wins their division, like it's a much different playoff sequence for them. Maybe, I mean, they had a tough playoff run. I mean, having to play Vancouver is not an easy thing, and Vancouver was a team that unfortunately, they were starting the year so hot and they kind of just they just fizzled out at the end. Elias Lindholm wasn't the player they thought they were getting at the trade deadline. They were deserving of a Western Conference Finals appearance, and they made it to Game 7 of the second round for a reason. But I think for Edmonton, if it's not this year, I think you're right. I mean, we're looking at future years where the West, I don't want to say it's wide open because you have tons of good teams, Colorado, Dallas, even Winnipeg to a certain extent. But I think for Edmonton, like, they're peaking right now. Year 10, I don't think is a time for a player really to finally break out. And I'm not saying, of course, McDavid's been good his whole career, but I think when he's at the pinnacle of his career where it's starting to get a little bit more, desperation kicking in, you have a really good, determined coach in Chris Knobloch. You have a good supporting cast. You have Zach Hyman, a guy who's, just has a knack for helping the team score goals. And you have, a pretty Evan Bouchard on the blue line, who's kind of just making his name known now in the playoffs as a blue liner. I think it's very promising for future years. But I think the thing that's interesting with the West is, I mean, you saw, right? I mean, a Florida team has been to the Stanley Cup Finals now in the past 5 years. The West has been different, though, right? And we won't count 2021 because that was a weird year, but every other year, right? Like, it's been a new team, and that's by design because the West is just there's so much parity in the West. And I think that's really the whole thing with the NHL in general. I think there's a lot of parity in the East too. But I think in the West specifically, I mean, nobody really knew who was going to I mean, I didn't expect Edmonton to make the finals, and they were the second place team in the Pacific. I thought it was going to be Dallas, and that wasn't a crazy take because Dallas literally had the best record. Dallas, I think, really, I mean, if we were doing an alternate reality video where Dallas and Florida were playing, I might have a much different opinion. I think Dallas is the deepest team in the NHL, but that's a whole other thing that's another time. But I think it's really interesting looking at this landscape of the NHL now where you have the Western Conference. I mean, in both, like I said, it's both. But in the West specifically, it's a lot more, you have McDavid and, I mean, you have Austin Matthews in the East. But I think in the West, it's a lot of, like, up-and-coming stars like Quinn Hughes and, Cale Makar and stuff like that. I don't think McDavid's up-and-coming, obviously. He's been in the league for a long time. But I think his guys are finally showing the world, hey, we can make playoff runs. We're not just good players on bad teams. And I think that's a really interesting thing. So we'll see what happens in the future years. But for this upcoming week, it's going to be one of those things where it's McDavid or bust. And I think you're right. He's not necessarily the guy that's getting all the goals for them, but he's also creating so many chances. So I think it comes down to, how they respond to the Florida goaltending and defense.
Well, you could make an argument that the Dallas Stars are better than the Oilers. This is a league of just inches, I guess. It's a game of inches. It's a league where if you have one or two bad bounces, bad turnovers, that could depict an entire series, not just a game. And we saw that in Game 6 with the Stars and Oilers, in which the Oilers clinched the conference title, where Dallas tied it up late, but don't forget that they also hit a post before they
Yeah.
I mean, they tied it up. They made it within one late, but they
Right.
also hit a post not too long before that. That could have been a 2-2 tied, and who knows where we go from there. Go to game 7 perhaps. It's a game of puck luck. It really is. One or two bad bounces could really just it could kill your momentum and kill your season. And so while on paper, yeah, technically the team that beats the other team in a best of 7 is the better team. I'm not so sure that's the case every year. You look at the 2021 year, that weird year where Montreal made the cup. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights in that Western Conference final, and Vegas, I think, was a lot better of a team that year. I think they just had the puck luck on their side, and we saw once they played the Lightning, it wasn't very competitive. But point is, man, Dallas is definitely a deep team. They've impressed me with their skill this year. They've grown tremendously. I think that they will absolutely make another deep playoff run or 2 or 3 in the future upcoming years. They're poised for it, and it's a game of inches, man. Like one little thing could screw up the series for you, and I think that the Oilers are definitely a top team in the West. Are they the best? Kind of seems that way since they're in the cup, but you could also make the argument that they've got some competition for best in the West. But we will see if they can pull it off against Florida or not. I just don't think it's gonna happen.
Who do you think's winning the Conn Smythe Trophy?
I don't know. Who do you think? I really thought
I think I think if Florida wins, I mean I think the easy pick is Kachuk. Given he has the most points for him in the playoffs. But I mean, I think it could really go to any of those guys. I think Barkov, Verhaeghe, or even Bobrovsky. I think if Edmonton wins, I think it'll be very hard to not give it to McDavid. I think my honorable mention would be Bouchard, just because he has had some crazy goals this playoffs, and we haven't expected that from a Oilers defenseman, right, on a team with such stacked offensive guys. So I think if Edmonton wins, I gotta go McDavid. I think if Florida wins, I think it's probably Kachuk, but maybe Verhaeghe, Barkov, not far behind, and maybe Bobrovsky if he has like a shutout or two. But that's my pick.
It's really hard to say. You're right about Edmonton. If Edmonton wins, it's a no-brainer. It's gonna be McDavid, because if McDavid doesn't contribute, Oilers are gonna not have a good series. Period. So
Yeah.
if the Oilers win the series, it's because McDavid contributed a hell of a lot, and so for those reasons, absolutely it would be McDavid. For Florida, I gotta follow up with you, Chuck, just because he's kind of their most productive player. Younger guy, has a lot of skill. It's hard not to pick Kachuk in that, but I also think you could see somebody that's kind of unexpected, like a Sam Reinhart maybe for the Panthers. Maybe he strings together a couple of really good games and is the reason they win a game or two. But again, with Bobrovsky, if he just puts together a couple of really good games, and honestly, Bobrovsky might not be a bad pick, because think about it. If Edmonton is having more games where they only put 10 shots up on net in the entire game, Bobrovsky's going to get most of that credit. Especially if he doesn't let either of those any of those 10 shots in the net. So I think that's another one to look out for.
And I think I haven't looked at all the free agency stuff for this offseason, but I do know that Sam Reinhart is a pending free agent. I don't know if he's a UFA or an RFA, but I think for him, it's like, yes, he had a great regular season, but this is like, we've never seen this really from Sam Reinhart before. We haven't seen this elite, one of the top goal scorers in the NHL before. So I think this is a really big series for him to sort of audition to other teams to be like, hey, I can be still a great player, because right now he has some of the best line mates in the league. But I think if he can go out there and, dare I say, win the Conn Smythe, he could get a bag. So I think that's a really big thing to think about. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I think with the Panthers, it just speaks to how deep they are, and not to say the Oilers aren't, because they're also a deep team. I mean, they have guys like we don't even talk about much, like Evander Kane, or plenty of guys on the lower lines that are really good, that have contributed in this playoffs. Matthias Ekholm as well. But for Florida, I think they're I want to say they're the deepest team in the Eastern Conference. I'm not gonna lie, I followed the West a little bit more this year just because of my LA Kings coverage and Ducks coverage and being a Sharks fan.
Right.
But I know the Dallas Stars to me are the deepest team in the NHL, like hands down. I don't know who can top that with the young guys and Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven and Joe Pavelski and the the old guys as well. But I think in the East, I want to say Florida. I mean, I can't think of anyone else who's deeper. Maybe Boston's up there, maybe New York, but the Rangers, that is, not the Islanders. But I think the Panthers are just so deep. And I think really it's going to come down to, like you said, maybe these more unlikely guys that we don't always talk about. And I feel like that happens a lot in the Stanley Cup final, right? There's guys that, don't necessarily star every, day in and day out, that really just kind of, get their face out there, so to speak, when the Stanley Cup happens, right? And so, yeah, and I think, too, I mean, one other comparison is, last year we saw what happened with Florida and Vegas, right? I mean, Vegas made a joke out of the Panthers when it was all said and done. What, it was was the last game 9-2? It was something.
It was a lot to do.
Yeah, it was, and I think now it's like, okay, Vegas. I think Vegas, this year had more talent than last year, just given the LTIR stuff. But last year, that Vegas team was just unstoppable. I mean, they were just incredible. And, you could feel that energy you were talking about. You could feel it with Vegas. And I think this year, like, I don't know if aura is the right word, but, like, I just don't think that, like, the Oilers have that same aura as the Knights did. Like, they're a very, very good team, and they've battled a lot of adversity. But I just think for Florida, it's like, I can't think of a thing with Florida besides like the penalties that they're just not good at. And there's a couple things for Edmonton that they could obviously improve upon. And one of that is goaltending. And Stuart Skinner is great. Don't get me wrong, but he's also had to play through Game 7, and he's also gotten a little bit luckier, like you said, with the 10, with the low shot totals against and whatnot. So I think it comes down to goaltending, and Florida has that in the bag. So my conclusion is Florida in 6. And that's my hard answer.
It's 9-3 was that final score of
9-3.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna one up. Yeah, I have Florida in 5. Honestly, I don't think Oilers compete. I don't. I think they get one home win for the home crowd. I think McDavid has a really good game and a one home win, but I think other than that, I cannot see Florida take it. It's just again, to have the motivation and the drive to get back to this point. How many teams get to the Stanley Cup final, play a very hard series, and lose it, and say, well, you know what, it was a great season, that's good enough for me, and they just kind of fizzle out? Not Florida. Florida had that willpower. They fought so hard, and they've been so motivated to get back to this point that I just don't see a team like Edmonton stopping a team like that in the Panthers. I know I'm rambling on and repeating myself a lot, but just I got Florida in 5. They're going to want to end this quickly.
To sort of round out my opinions, I think the interesting thing with both these teams is, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the top heaviness. Because if you look at the playoff scorers for Edmonton, they have like 5 that are scoring a lot of points. But then below that, it's a lot of single-digit guys. Whereas for Florida, it's like 6 or 7 double-digit guys, and then the rest are 6 or 7 double-digit guys, and then the rest are single digits. So Florida definitely has, less top heaviness on their lines, but they have a lot more guys contributing assists and goals. Whereas for Edmonton, it's mostly McDavid and Bouchard and Hyman and some other guys, and then a little. So I don't know. It's all on paper, so it doesn't actually matter until the series starts. But yeah. I think when it comes down to the last series of the year, everybody's tired. At this point, you've played nearly. I think both teams have. I think Edmonton's played exactly 100 games now. 82 plus 18. That's 100. I think I want to say that they played 100 games. I mean, that's very tiring. And at this point, I mean, yes, like McDavid's going to be a huge factor in this series, but they're also going to have to rely on their third and fourth liners when he's tired. And that's going to happen for, 40 minutes of the game, likely. And I think for Florida, their lower lines are just better, right? They have, and I can give you the stat exactly. Florida has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 double-digit scorers in the playoffs. Edmonton has 5. Now, it's not a huge difference, but I think when it comes down, that's 2 players, right, that are going to contribute points. So I don't know if it means anything, but we'll see.
It's gonna be a good series. That's all I have to say. Um, it's gonna be so fun to watch the the Panthers fight for the redemption, and then to square off against McDavid in his first Stanley Cup. That's kind of the storyline here is McDavid in his first cup, and I'm really excited to watch him play in it. So I'll be tuning into every game that I can. So that's all I got.
Well, I think one interesting thing is Dallas sports right now are crazy because you have
Oh yeah,
Texas. I mean, they could have had their NBA team and NHL team in the finals. The last time that happened was 2016 when the Warriors and the Sharks went to the Stanley Cup and finals, respectively. But their baseball team won the World Series last year. Their NBA team is in the finals, and they were just a couple games away from having their NHL team in the finals. So shout out to Dallas. Cowboys, different
Big
story
D.
over there. Yeah, different story with them, but it's good for Edmonton, though. I mean, look, I mean, it's not a premier Canadian city. It's not a Toronto, right? It's not Montreal. They got a devoted fan base. I watch those games. They paint their faces. They love their team, and you got to give it to them. They're really devoted up there up the north.
Yeah, the entire population of Edmonton that didn't go to the game was outside whenever they panned to the plaza outside of the stadium during the games. It's the entire population of that city follows the team. It's a very devoted city, very devoted fan base, and I'd be really happy for them if they won. Oilers would be one of the few Canadian teams that I would be really happy for if they won the cup. Just Toronto would not be one. Vancouver would not be one, just to name a few. But Oilers, I would be really happy for, really, and it's gonna be a fun time.
We'll see what happens. It's gonna, like you said, I'm gonna tune in as much as I can. So
I will say another weird ESPN stat. The last time an Alberta-based team played a Florida-based team in the Stanley Cup final, 2004, Lightning versus Flames. Lightning won. The Florida team got the better of Alberta, and I think history repeats itself.
you had Jerome McGinley on the Flames, and yeah, I didn't even remember that, but that's a good finals for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got, man. But that being said, we'll see what do we got cooking up next. You think for videos?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, NHL draft. Now, would we do NHL draft? Do you guys have a first round pick?
Yeah, but I actually don't know. It's the thing. I don't really follow the NHL draft. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't have enough knowledge for. I hardly have an NFL prospect and college player knowledge, let alone NHL. I don't know like any of those guys, but
The MLB postseason.
MLB postseason, I guess. Yeah, that would probably be next. So October, got a couple months before then.
Well, I guess we'll have to figure out something to do.
Yeah,
especially our teams might not be in the MLB postseason. Who knows?
They won't be. Well, I can't speak for the Giants. The Rays, no, it's not going to happen.
The Giants are in the wild card race, but they've dropped their last 5. So I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll figure out something.
No, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll catch you whenever that happens. But thank you so much for watching. It's always a pleasure doing this with you, Casey. Never gets old, never gets boring. It's a lot of fun. Been strong for 5 years now. I think we've been doing this 5-6 years.
Like that.
It's been a while, and it's been fun the entire way. So, looking forward to the next one. And thanks for watching this one, everybody. Peace out.